You are listening to the Break Time Tech Talks podcast, a bite-sized tech podcast for busy developers, where we'll briefly cover technical topics, news snippets, and more in short time blocks. I'm your host, Jennifer Reif, an avid developer and problem solver with special interest in data, learning, and all things technology. This week, I got back into code and did some further digging and learning on ways to update entities with Spring Data Neo4j. Then I had an exciting release of an ebook that I co-wrote before the holidays that includes skills you need to build your first knowledge graph. To start us off, I had written a blog post, I guess it was summer of 2023 now, about how to update entities, or nodes specifically, in Spring Data Neo4j. And there were some troubles and gotchas and things that I ran into along the way throughout that blog post. And I really didn't leave with a sense of finding a great solution to what I was looking for. But I had recently put together a Spring Data Neo4j course for Neo4j's Graph Academy, the online free course that I've mentioned here on this podcast before, and I learned some new things about updating nodes and relationships. There were some things that I wanted to create a round 2 blog post, basically, of the one that I did back in 2023, and add some more detail and some other options to the list of ways to update entities using Spring Data Neo4j. I'll provide some hints here, but I won't go into super detail. All of that will be provided in the upcoming blog post here, hopefully soon. The first couple of options I'm looking at are some custom cipher statements with methods to update certain parts of entities, and then projections, which I may have mentioned on this podcast before. I know I've mentioned it on my blog post, and I've definitely worked with it in the past in a few different ways. But the biggest hurdles with updates using Spring Data Neo4j is there really aren't that many examples. There really aren't too many examples of updating using applications anyway, which was one of my complaints in my initial blog post back in 2023, and the whole reason why I wrote it in the first place. Everyone typically goes to those read operations. Occasionally you'll have a create or delete, but not many will showcase that write side, the writing data, especially the update, because that gets a little tricky, right? You want to update property values or certain things, and you want to leave certain things, and do you want idempotent objects or not, and so on. I hope to provide more detail about this in an upcoming blog post, but we will look at some custom cipher, some projections. Currently, I'm evaluating some things like optimistic locking through the at version field, and then also looking at repository extensions and things of that nature. I think those things are going to be a little bit overkill for what I'm just looking for right now. But again, just some options to explore and at least mention and maybe provide further details on those down the road. So look out for an accompanying code repository on GitHub and then a blog post following that. All right, the piece of content I wanted to look at was there's a new book that we are promoting that as of this week called The Developer's Guide, How to Build a Knowledge Graph. And it is a new release with me as one of the co-authors, so one of 3. This was an enormous amount of work by several people. We spent quite a bit of the fall of 2024 working on this, putting this all together. There were some challenges, and I'm going to highlight some things in this podcast today of some things that kind of surprised me or things that were really helpful and interesting as well. The first thing was graph data science. We looked at a graph data science section, looking at analytics, how to apply this onto a knowledge graph. And we will be adding a section for analytics upcoming, but just starting to look into this and work on it. It's not in the current version of the ebook, but it will be there soon. I found that I really needed to update and refresh my skills on graph data science. Since last I had looked at it, it had changed quite a bit. Figuring out best practices and how to apply things and the exact syntax I needed for my use case was a little bit trickier than what I thought out of the box. So sometimes syntax is hard to apply depending on your specific use case and the data you're dealing with and so on. Don't be discouraged if you're looking at documentation. It's hard sometimes to extrapolate a reference syntax to the syntax that you're actually working with in the real world. Hopefully we will be coming together and putting a good, helpful, interesting section together for you that will update the ebook this spring, but just know that that's coming, and graph data science analytics is a challenging component of this. Also, when you're not a data scientist, when you're a developer, as am I, you don't have a lot of the background context of the data science and the algorithms and so on. It's hard sometimes to figure out when or how to apply certain algorithms to your specific data set and to help you solve certain questions, right? Okay, I know these algorithms look interesting, but what is that going to tell me when I apply it to my data set? Do I actually need this? Will it give me an answer that I'm interested in pursuing, right? That's the analytics side of things. Then the cipher section, which is in the ebook right now, it's hard to find data that's relevant and interesting to broad audiences. You don't want to choose a data set that is overused and boring, but you want to find something that's broadly applicable and understandable by wide audiences. So that can be a real challenge. And then you have to construct the problems and the queries to solve them. You want to find something that showcases the graph's ability to handle the complexity without being overly complex and increase the learning curve for those who are just starting out their learning journey. For instance, if you haven't looked at graph before, if you haven't looked at cipher before, you want something that's approachable and has as low of a learning curve as you can, but yet still showcases the ability of graph to handle complex, intricate problems, right? That was a challenge, I thought, putting that cipher section together, finding something that was interesting, finding something useful, and yet showing off really the strengths of graph databases and knowledge graphs. Then another challenge we had in writing this book was just the product improvements. There was a lot going on last fall. There were changes to the user interface within Aura console. There were some changes going on with offerings, packaging, tools, and so on that were getting bundled in and moved around a little bit. And we had to actually go back several different times and upload new screenshots or tweak processes and so on to make things easier or to show what was actually happening and what users would actually see when they went through the examples. That was just something with the speed and acceleration of things changing within products and technology in general. Sometimes it's really hard to keep up and keep on top of that. Again, this will be an evergreen resource, so that I'm sure there will be more changes coming, hopefully to match any changes that are happening in the product right now. Last but not least is just the collaboration aspect. And it's always tricky when you put a bunch of different perspectives and heads together. We had a third-party writer, an internal Neo4j product marketer, and then myself as a Neo4j developer advocate. And to combine all those different perspectives into something that's useful and helpful to various audiences, right? To wider audiences. I thought it was interesting and exciting, but also complex to bring all those perspectives together into something cohesive. There were also really interesting new perspectives. I have a very developer advocate mindset, right? And each of our writers is going to bring about some different highlights or challenges or messages that they want to focus on. That's wonderful. That's exciting. But then it gets hard to kind of weave those all into something that's cohesive. It is easy to get zoned into your own mindset. And so it's really nice to hear others' perspectives and try to incorporate all of that together. As I mentioned, this Knowledge Graph ebook will be an evergreen resource. There is a new section on analytics that will be coming probably this spring, and then continuous updates for product improvements over time. Though I didn't get to some other exploration topics that I really had hoped to this week, I was excited to explore updating entities with Spring Data Neo4j for an hopefully upcoming round 2 blog post on the topic. I hope to continue feeding my curiosity and learning there. Then I've been excited this week to share the Knowledge Graph ebook in hopes that it can help technical practitioners in their endeavors. That's all for now, but stay tuned. Thanks for listening and happy coding.